Welcome to Just Make Art, a conversation about making art and the artist journey with myself, Ty Nathan Clark, and my buddy Nathan Terborg from Minneapolis. We're two artists trying to navigate the art world just like you, and I'm excited to bring a pretty incredible woman and quote to this week's episode.
Yeah, so this week we're going to talk about a quote from the amazing Sonia Boyce. It's a pretty short one, but it's pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Goes like this: let frustration fuel inspiration. Let frustration fuel inspiration. You might have to take it away on this one, because I mean, it's been a minute since I haven't been frustrated since probably, it's like the early 2000s. So I don't know anything about frustration.
Yeah. Well, let me dive into Sonia Boyce first, who is a British artist who lives and works and teaches in London. She's a professor of black art and design at the University of Arts London, and she is insane. She is a deep diver in the exploration of art as social practice. And she's all over the map, like me, but I do not put myself even close to the category of her, where she works in multidisciplinary facets of art: drawing, film, photography, print, sound. Wow. She dives into the relationship between sound and memory, dynamics of space. And she's the first black woman, in 2022 to represent Britain in the Venice Biennale. That is pretty powerful and long overdue, I must say, that there has been a black female represented in the Venice Biennale from Britain. So congratulations on that to Sonia Boyce. That is incredible. And so let frustration fuel inspiration. Sonia's frustrations are, very different than yours and mine, obviously, with her history in Britain as a black female. And so we could easily dive into political things and her battle for racial and gender equality that she has brought phenomenal storytelling through her multidisciplinary art to the world with, to share that story with a powerful voice across the world. But we're going to kind of relate it more to just our own studio practices, for you and I, and as an artist, letting frustration fuel inspiration.
Yeah, and I think it's important to you already hit on it, but it's important to say that, your frustration is your frustration, and, we're all going to experience, a different form of it. So, whether or not your work is about, the things that move you on a global or a broad or, a deep level, there's always just going to be distraction, frustration, things that are going to, resistance, right? That would keep us from making art, which is the entire thrust of what we're trying to discuss with this whole podcast. So, I think, just the whole idea of, let's just talk about frustration, while we're on that subject. It can be anything. I think when you're a human being living a modern existence, there's no shortage of things that, could potentially, frustrate us. And I think that, as I was considering this quote too, Ty, I was thinking about, there's a choice to be made every time, we recognize that there is frustration, here. And that in and of itself, I think, is really important. It's taken me a long time to get to know myself well enough to realize that, boy, I'm a delicate little flower. I get frustrated, and it doesn't take much to, even just trying to get this, get going today. The fact that, the browser wasn't working, I had to restart and reinstall, and I used to fancy myself being so great at just rolling with the punches and, going with the flow. That just isn't true. I'm very easily disturbed and easily bothered by any number of things. So I think, one of the things that, I think is important in terms of converting, frustration into fuel, is first of all, acknowledging that, just changing the language, right? The disassociation of I am not frustrated, but there is frustration here, or even taking that whatever third party perspective of, Nathan is experiencing frustration right now. It's a very different, different dynamic. And it's something that I've learned through self-work and, therapy to realize, oh, okay, I don't have to own that feeling necessarily. I don't have to be, frustration. I just need to acknowledge that I'm experiencing, frustration first and foremost. So, let's just start there. What's your experience with frustration in general? How easier or how good are you at recognizing that you're experiencing it first and foremost, and then what do you do with it?
Well, and I'm in that same boat that you're in, working through therapy and counseling and those things, and coming to those realizations that you have, having dealt with severe past trauma in my childhood and things where, I've been lucky enough to see counselors and have a lot of help for healing and learning those moments and when they arise and how they can affect you. Especially for myself, where I'm an extreme extrovert. And I thrive on being around people. But with that, I have serious highs and serious lows.
Yeah.
And so, I've learned to be a little more stable than so high up and so far down that it affects everything. And a great example for me, from my life, I'd say is 2020. And I felt like I was being berated by language and information from the news, election cycles here in America, politics, racial divides, gender divides. I mean, there were so many things that I just felt like everything around me was trying to tell me something, right? From sides I agreed with, sides I disagreed with. And we all know in America, families are being ripped apart. Friendships are being ripped apart through this divide over the last few years. And, I had to really sit and think because I was getting so frustrated with everything. And I kind of thought to myself, what's a way that I can control language in my life? Because we're going to get it from social media. We're going to get it from music. We're going to get it from the news. We're going to get it from family, friends, all this information and language. And I was thinking, what's a way I can control the language to kind of settle my frustrations? And I decided that for the entire year, I would listen to music with no words. So that, and I'm in the studio, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, painting and working depending on the body of work I'm creating. And so I have music on all the time. And I thought, even music has language, right? Mm-hmm. That speaks to us and influences us. What's one thing I could remove language completely from my situation? So I listened to classical music and jazz for a year and did an entire body of work called Paintings to Sound. Mm-hmm. But through this, I started to research jazz musicians and jazz music and classical composers. But it really did draw that frustration out of me and allowed me to just be centered and focused. Yeah. But that's just one example of many.
That's probably a good conversation for another day. We may need to retitle this podcast "Conversation for Another Day."
For another day, yeah.
Yep. But as you're saying that, I'm thinking like that's interesting. Comparison to, jazz, classical music, anything without words. That's kind of an interesting comparison to the difference between representational art and abstract art, as well. But that's not what we're talking about today. So let's get back on topic. I think so. The fuel part of this, is I think really where we boil down the power of this quote, right? Like, so I was thinking about, when you can convert, not just the positive inspiration or the whatever the good stuff is, or whatever your definition of inspiration is, right? I mean, there's plenty of, creatives who, lean on or almost unfortunately require, self-destructive behavior or living or staying in the darkness, so to speak, to inspire their work. But when you can convert whatever is present into fuel, you kind of become, bulletproof from a creative standpoint, right? Like I liken it to, the flex fuel vehicles that can run on gas, they can run on electric, and maybe even solar at some point, right? So you become kind of that adaptable, flex fuel, omnivorous, right? Like whatever you put in, we can convert into fuel, when we can figure out how to use what is and what's available as opposed to being in a spot where our, creative process is conditional, based on things that in many cases may be completely outside of our control, right? So, just that whole idea of fuel, I really like that a lot.
Well, and I mean, that's the power and the beauty of art, right? Is that, you date back to Picasso's Guernica painting, right? He let his frustration fuel his inspiration for one of the most transformative pieces in the history of abstract art that really fueled the ideation behind abstract expressionism, right? That it circled the world at the point, during the World Fair in the US when all the early abstract expressionists saw the piece and went, wow, I can put emotion to the piece and express my anger with war, my anger with this, my anger with this. And I can create that and put it out there to be a voice, right? And speak, which is really, what Sonia built a lot of her career, on powerfully and being a voice for the marginalized, in the 80s, with the radical political art movement, the British Black Arts movement, and she was a voice for those that, were marginalized with race and gender and equality. And that's the power of art, right? It's like, it's not just our personal frustrations. What are we frustrated with in life? Like art has been able to be a voice to say, hell no, or hell yes, or look at what you're doing. I don't agree with what you're saying. So here, some of my favorite artists like Glenn Lejeune, Theaster Gates, just powerful political statements through their work that just I have chills thinking of some of the work I've seen of theirs in person, from Milan to LA to New York. And, somebody like Sonia who has taken traditional elements, right, of Afro, historic art from Africa, the color choices to the figures and representing family, right? The dependence on family when you can't depend on your political party or your country to support you. You have to depend on family. And she's taking historical elements and combine them into modern art as a voice for her people and for people outside of that to go, oh, wow, I didn't realize this is what we were doing or this is what I was doing. That's the beauty of art.
Yeah. Yeah. And what a powerful place to be, as an artist, to be able to be in a place where we have the ability to speak for others, to speak for yourself, right? To talk about your personal experience. I mean, a lot of her work certainly is autobiographical, especially I really like a lot of her drawings around family and the family dynamic, but it's amazing how, one's individual experience, definitely resonates with, entire groups, of people or, people that just have a shared experience regardless of what their particular walk of life or background might be.
Well, and, art is different, right? And you think of somebody like Sonia, multidisciplinary, right? Where she can paint, she uses photography, sound, video, like it's basically all the senses.
Yeah.
When you think about it, right? And when you have, basically a process or the story that she tells through her art, which is memory, is the big theme, memory. You have to tie all the senses into it, right? Because you're able to touch on the viewer and the audience in multiple areas, sound, sight, feeling, all the different types that you can be involved in with your senses, as my words, my mental ability slips here. My own frustration. I'll let it fuel what I'm going to say next. But that's the special thing about art is, being a voice to those that don't have the ability to create something that you can put out there. Artists, as Madeline L'Engle says, we're the ones that are aware of things with a heightened sense. And we lie in bed at night thinking about how we can solve the world problems. But we have to get up the next day to create something to share what we're feeling.
Right.
I mean, that's a special trait that we have as artists, and artists who really take that step to really be that. That's a Sonia.
So let's talk about, how do we make this more, not more, but how do we apply this? How do we make this more tangible or tactical for, for everybody. I think about like, all right, okay, I'm dealing with this. This is whatever this might be, for any one of us. But this is my frustration. This is my situation. These are my circumstances. What do I do with this? How do I, let's just talk about, how do we convert that frustration, and let it fuel inspiration?
Well, this is something that you and I have touched on before in previous podcasts, is journaling and taking notes and ideating, really building out the idea to what it could become. And, we talk a lot about being mature as an artist and being immature. That growth process is, okay, this is frustrating me. Now, why is it frustrating me? What is frustrating me? How is it frustrating me? What can I create to tell this story? And then really spending time researching and building out that idea. Is that going to be an installation? Is it a painting? Is it a short film? How can I tell this story and voice my frustration best? What is the fuel that I have as a creator, as an artist, where my strengths are to really put this idea into a practice? And I know, a lot of artists ask me, how do I tell this story? How do I even begin? What do I do? I've got these ideas. What do I do? And I'm like, man, well, number one, you don't need permission to do it. A lot of artists feel like, I just need permission to go ahead and do it. There are no no's in art. You use whatever you want to use to make it. Nobody can tell you what you're making is wrong. You have permission. Go create what your frustration is really building to be. Go create it. But you got to spend some time really thinking it through so that you can really fulfill what you want that story to be when you put it out there to the world.
You absolutely do. Yeah. And I will, just speaking from personal experience, I've learned, as I figure out what's going on with myself, internally and just, develop more awareness about, myself. It's, I realized recently how disconnected I am from, really, really being able to put a finger on, what am I feeling? What am I experiencing? Just kind of this vague sense of like, just basic, caveman vocabulary of Nathan is happy, Nathan is sad, or, oftentimes the sadness comes out sideways as anger. So, I think a lot of it is just that, like you talked about, the value of journaling, processing. I mean, I require that. Like, I don't have the, emotional intelligence, or vocabulary to be able to, just sort of process, okay, this is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm experiencing. This is what's frustrating me. Okay, cool. Got it. Now I know what to do with it. Like, I have to spend time with it. I have to journal. It takes a lot to just get it out there and even make the most basic realizations of like, okay, this is what's going on here, So I think that initial part, that process, depending upon where a person's at, with their own personal journey, but that's a pretty important, step in the process, is just taking the time to really consider, what indeed is going on, before then figuring out, what the hell to do with it.
Well, and, if you have an artist group of peers, share the ideas with them. I think, my mentorship group that I started is pretty fortunate that within each group, there's 5 or 6 to 7 artists within each of the 3-month sessions. And, numbers of them have grown close across all 6 sessions that I've had so far, right? So 32, 33 artists from different groups have gotten together, France, Spain, Germany, US, whatever, and built little networks of artists. And I know everybody knows how important that is now when they see, wow, I've got this idea. I can build it out, and then I can not pitch it, but so to speak, share it with my peers. Hey, what do you think? Right? Mm-hmm. What do you think? I know we've talked about don't listen to the outside world, but that doesn't mean, hey, this is where I'm going. This is where I'm strong. My work. What do you think? How do you think I could really develop this? Like, there's so much importance in finding a network of artists that you can kind of critique your work or your ideas and help you flush them out, as you go into the studio to work.
So how do you, once you've identified, what it is that you're processing, dealing, what the frustration might be, do you have any tactical advice on how to, once you've figured out and developed some awareness around, what's going on, how to convert that into the necessary activities, right? Like, I think, take a step back here while you consider that. Mm-hmm. Like, there's macro frustrations, and then there's just micro frustrations. Like I talked about earlier, like, it doesn't take much to throw me off. It's pretty embarrassing when I really think about it, to be totally vulnerable. Like, the things that can, throw me off and get me out of my groove. So I'm talking about micro frustrations here, obviously, but, it doesn't take much. So I don't think it much matters, if we're talking about a micro frustration, something more minor, everyday, pedestrian, just life being life. Or if we're talking about, a macro issue that is heavy and real and deep and, something that isn't, going anywhere anytime soon. Either way, there's something there, how do we convert it into, creative activity?
For me, routine is very important in that. I'm so scatterbrained as an artist. I love to sculpt. I love to do photography. I love to, I produce an award-winning documentary film. I just finished my first novel. I mean, I'm all over the board. I write constantly, create. So if I don't have a routine in place, right, studio, not necessarily set hours, but a routine, right? Mm-hmm. A, B, C, D, right? It really helps me with that because when I'm in a routine, I have a really good flow. So when frustration comes in and not talking like outside world frustration, just personal frustration, right? That frustration of my work isn't really going where I want it to. I don't feel motivated to really work today. And that frustrates, I should feel motivated. I get to do this full time.
Yeah.
I've found that for me, routine, which I'm not in a good routine right now. So there's been a lot of frustration lately. So when I'm in that routine, I can battle those things and just make and sit and listen and work and write. And I have a really good flow. Yeah. If I don't have that ebb and flow, frustrations build and my wife can tell and she lets me know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a big one. I mean, I think it does come down to activity, and doing the thing, whatever the thing is, whether we feel like it or not, right? Inspiration has to find us working, the muse has to find us, working. So, that's a big one. I mean, it's kind of a, to pull another, Jerry Saltz quote, but just get to work, you big baby,
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a, I mean, it comes down to, again, what we're trying to communicate, just overall, which is just make art, make it about, the big thing, make it about the small thing, but just keep making it, and I think, one of the things that I've learned too, just in life, in my previous life, in business is that, I don't need to feel good in order to show up and do the work. I don't need to feel good to perform good. In fact, sometimes, I perform better or I am more productive. I'm laughing as I'm listening to my own verbiage around, achievement based, value system. But regardless, it doesn't have to be, all positive. It doesn't have to be all butterflies and rainbows. In fact, not a lot of great art, has been made around, I had a great day, for every, today was a good day by Ice Cube. There's a whole lot more great art that was made about the shitty days and some of the very worst things that, he and countless other artists, experience. So I don't know.
We have to show up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Showing up is the first step.
Yeah.
Right. That's the first step to, battling that frustration. Show up. Cause it's so easy, right, to not show up. It is so easy to go, you know what? Not today. I'm going to turn Netflix on and watch the next season of Ozark.
Yeah.
And then 6 hours have gone by. It's easy to not show up, and not showing up, showing up doesn't mean you have to be working on art in the studio.
Right.
Maybe you're just sitting in the studio and looking at your art. Maybe you're pulling out that book and you're reading 9th Street Women in the studio, or you're reading Picasso's biography. That could be showing up, just focusing on work, because when you're surrounding yourself by art, you're going to want to create art at some point. You're going to want to get in and work. And I think, I don't remember the exact words as I butcher the Mark Bradford quote, but he says, even if I'm sick or I'm depressed, or even if I have diarrhea, I show up. In the worst states of physical, whatever, I do my best to show up. And here, a great example. The last 3 months of mine have been complete hell. Gosh, so hard to show up when I'm feeling so horrible. But what did I do? In the times I felt like it, I read. I had my books out, reading David Lynch's book, Wabi Sabi for Artists, reading multiple Joan Miro, biographies, Helen Frankenthaler, watching documentaries, films that I love, Julian Schnabel's films, art documentaries, but I was still surrounding myself with art, and I was still journaling. Even when my body was aching and I felt like I wanted to die, I was journaling what I could do when I get in the studio. That's still showing up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you bring up a really good point too, which is, I think the more, voracious you are about, reading and just learning about other artists' experiences, the more perspective you get about, how big or small, your stuff might be, right? I mean, that's not true. Yeah. That's not just about art. That's true of anything in life, right? Somebody's always had it, a lot worse than you. And in spite of that, have found a way to show up. And, oh, by the way, they're just people too. I mean, they're just human beings. It wasn't easy for them. It's not easy for anybody. To your point, there's never going to be any shortage of, reasons to not go to work, to not show up. And there's never going to be any shortage of things that are going to be more comfortable to do in the moment, as a distraction, fill in the blank with whatever your vice or distraction, might be. It's always going to be more comfortable, to not show up, to sit in the stuff and let the stuff, again, whatever that might be, distract us and keep us from, showing up and doing the work. And it does come down to habits, right? It comes down to routine. It comes down to, I think this really, when we talk about identity or, having a personal code, like I am somebody, and just, this is a mantra. This is, it may not sound true the first 1,000 times you say it, but I am somebody who shows up and goes to work, no matter what. I'm going to make marks. I'm going to read. I'm going to do something related to my practice. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, because it could be any number of different, elements or aspects, of the practice. It doesn't just have to be, hey, I finished a piece that I'm stoked about today. It could be anything, but just freaking showing up consistently is the name of the game, right? And over time, that's going to lead to the great work, right? The crappy work leads to the great work. Yeah.
Well, and our artists whose quote we're using today, Sonia Boyce, right? She showed up constantly, time and time again. And through that perseverance, the amount of artists that she's inspired and taught and mentored and led, is just phenomenal, right? And look, 30 years later, she is representing her country in the Venice Biennale. 30 years later.
Yeah.
We're not talking 5 years later, 10 years later.
Right.
Like it was a constant showing up. Now, should she have been recognized earlier? Absolutely. Yes. But man, art's a long game.
Yeah.
And for a lot of artists, especially artists of different racial backgrounds, economic backgrounds, seem to not be recognized as much as other artists with certain racial backgrounds and economic backgrounds, which is very unfortunate. But she showed up and continued to show up, and she is being well recognized, and it is so deserving. Man, talk about frustration, fueling inspiration. It's a beautiful story.
Yeah, I'm really thankful that this quote and this conversation gave both of us a reason to do a deep dive on her work, because it's so expansive and it's so inspirational, and it doesn't matter, where you're coming from. I mean, you can see, you can feel, the deep meaning, in the work, and it's amazing. I mean, I always have a a bit of a bias towards, any creative that is dipping their toes in multiple, waters and mediums, because I think that, again, when that's in you, when there's something that's in you that needs to get out, it can find any number of outlets, ways to get out in the world and move and inspire people. So, incredible artist, incredible story, and really great conversation. I'm glad we had a chance to unpack this today. Any closing remarks, Mr. TNC?
No, if you're frustrated out there, go make some art. Get in the studio, get in your bedroom, garage, whatever space you have. If you have to work outside, go outside. Paper, canvas, cardboard, whatever the hell you have that you can create on, go there. There's nothing you can't use. Yeah. We talk about this all the time. You have permission to use anything, like Mark Bradford said years ago, if I can't find it in Home Depot, I'm not going to use it. Mm-hmm. So it's like that's just giving artists permission, right? To just go make art. It's what this whole podcast is around. We just want to encourage you all. You have permission to go make stuff and inspire your community, artists around you, your city, your country, wherever you're from. Go be that storyteller and let your frustration fuel your inspiration.
Yeah. And don't confuse. It's real easy. I don't think I'm the only person that falls in this category, but, when I hear, just make art, I translate that somewhere between the meaning and my understanding is, make good art, right? I'm only going to feel successful if your definition for success is I made good art, or I made art that I'm excited about. Well, guess what? We're setting ourselves up for failure a lot more often, than not. So just understanding that it's just the practice of, writing words, making marks, making as much bad art as is necessary, to get to the good art. So the definition of success comes from, I did something, I did something related to my practice. I engaged in a portion of my routine to the extent that it was possible today. And that over time is going to lead me to where I ultimately want to go and help me say what I'm trying to say.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. Find those nuggets of beauty in all the work that you're doing now, and let that guide you to where the great pieces come from. Go make art. Find us on Instagram. We'd love to say hi to you for sure. And we're looking forward to what we have for you next.
Heck yeah. Join us next time on Just Make Art. Over and out.
Yeah.